The day they drove away, the worst part wasn't the goodbye. It was the silence that followed it. No tears, no lingering hugs, no backward glance, just the sound of the car door closing, the quiet start of the engine, and the slow roll of tires on gravel. I stood there, suitcase in hand, coat barely resting on my shoulders, watching my son and daughter-in-law drive away. My grandson's window was down. He looked at me for a moment, then turned his head, too busy with his phone to wave. They didn't even come in to see the room. The staff at Rosewood Nursing Home was kind, I suppose. A young girl named Hannah wheeled me to the room. She tried to make conversation, saying how cozy it was, how friendly the other residents were. I nodded, pretending to listen, pretending I wasn't dying inside. Because how do you tell someone that you've just been discarded like a broken appliance? That the people you fed, clothed, bathed, and rocked to sleep now think you are a burden? I'm not angry, not yet. But I am tired. Tired in that deep, bone-aching way that no amount of sleep can fix. My name is Eleanor May Whitmore. I was born in 1948. I raised 2 children, David and Anna. I ran a household for over 50 years. I sewed Halloween costumes from scratch, nursed them through fevers, and packed lunches with little notes tucked inside. I gave up promotions to attend PTA meetings. I sold my wedding ring to cover David's college books when scholarships fell short. And when my daughter-in-law got sick after giving birth, who stepped in to care for little Ethan? Me. I was there. Every day. Every bottle, every midnight cry. They used to call me their rock. Now they call me an inconvenience. The room they placed me in had a window that faced the back alley. No garden. No sunshine. Just the rustle of delivery trucks and the buzz of fluorescent hallway lights. I placed the single photo I was allowed to bring on the windowsill. A picture of me holding baby Ethan in the park, both of us smiling like fools. I was 62 then. My back was stronger. Asu? My heart fuller. I remember that day like yesterday. Ethan had just said his first word, Nana. It wasn't long after that when everything began to shift. David got a promotion. His wife recovered. I was no longer needed every day. And slowly, my calls were returned less, visits fewer. Then came the day they said, "It's best for you now, Mom. You need help we can't give." I wanted to ask, what about all the help I gave you? But I didn't. Because pride is a quiet thing when you're a mother. That night, lying in a twin bed too stiff to feel like mine, I cried without making a sound. The woman in the next room kept coughing. The air smelled like hand sanitizer and old soup. And I realized something. No one was coming back tomorrow. Or the day after. I was not here for recovery. I was here because they didn't want me at home anymore. It hurt. But what hurt more was knowing this. I raised their children. And now they left me to be raised by strangers. The silence between phone calls. The first week, I waited by the phone. Every morning, I made sure my hearing aid had fresh batteries. I sat in the chair closest to the wall where the cordless phone was mounted. I asked the nurse twice to make sure the ringer was on high. I told myself David would call. Maybe not the first day. Maybe he was busy. But surely by the weekend. He always called on Sundays, even before all this. Sunday came, Sunday went. Nothing. I asked Hannah, the young staff member, if the phones were working. She gave me a gentle smile and said, "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, your line is fine." I pretended to nod, pretending I believed her. Because it was easier than admitting the truth. The silence wasn't technical. It was personal. One evening, the phone finally rang. I nearly tripped rushing to answer it. "Mom, hey, just checking in. Sorry, it's been a hectic week." David sounded tired, distracted. There was noise in the background, the television, maybe Ethan talking to someone. "We'll visit soon, okay?" "Maybe next weekend. Ethan's got soccer and Diane's been slammed at work." "You understand, right?" I said I did. Of course I did. I always do. The call lasted 3 minutes. I stared at the receiver long after he hung up. Not because I was angry, but because I was trying to memorize the sound of his voice. Like it might be a while before I heard it again. The second week, I started taking walks down the hallway. It gave me something to do. Somewhere to be. There was Mr. Frederick, who always wore a suit, even in bed. Miss Irene, who talked to her late husband in whispers every afternoon. Mrs. Carter, who played the same piano song every morning until her hands trembled. And there was me. The woman who used to be essential. Now just extra. I sat with a book most days, pretending to read. But my eyes didn't move across the page. I watched the entrance instead. The staff would buzz in new visitors, children bringing flowers, grandkids with handmade cards. And I would watch. And wait. and hoped that just once David or Ethan would be among them. They never were. One of the staff brought me a small notebook. She said some residents like to keep a journal. I opened it that night and wrote, Day 10. No call. Still remember the way Ethan used to laugh when I sang him silly songs in the bath. He said I had the warmest arms. I wonder if he remembers that too. Day 12. Hannah says I look pale. I told her it's just the lighting. Truth is, I didn't sleep. I dreamed of packing lunchboxes and waiting at the bus stop. I dreamed I still mattered. Day 14. Sunday again. No call. The third week, I stopped waiting by the phone. But I didn't stop hoping. Because mothers never really stop, do they? We wait and wait and wait. Until the waiting becomes part of who we are. And in the silence between phone calls, I realized something that broke my heart all over again. They weren't going to come back for me. Not because they didn't care, but because somewhere along the line, they forgot how much I mattered. The forgotten birthday cake, my birthday fell on a Tuesday that year, March 8th. No balloons, no cards, no laughter drifting down the hallway like it used to when I baked my children cakes in the shape of animals. No one even asked if the day meant anything to me, except Hannah. It was 10:17 a.m. when she peeked her head into my room. She was holding a small cupcake in her hand. A single candle stuck out of it like a quiet whisper. No sprinkles, just chocolate frosting and a smile. Happy birthday, Mrs. Whitmore, she said gently. I saw it on your chart. I hope you don't mind. I blinked. I hadn't expected anyone to remember. Not anymore. Thank you, dear, I said, my voice cracking more than I intended. She lit the candle. I watched the flame dance for a moment, and I didn't blow it out right away. I stared at it, because somewhere in my heart, I was still waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring, for my son to call, for Ethan to say, Happy birthday, Nana. It never came. At lunchtime, the dining room buzzed with casual chatter. Someone laughed at a joke about dentures. Someone else asked for extra pudding. I sat at a table near the window, the cupcake untouched before me. I was surrounded by people, and yet I had never felt more invisible. Mrs. Carter, who always wore lavender perfume, sat beside me. She leaned over and said, You all right, honey? I forced a smile. It's my birthday. She gasped. Well, happy birthday to you. You didn't tell us. We could have sung or something. It's all right, I said. Because that's what you say when you don't want to sound like you're hoping for more. Back in my room that afternoon, I opened my drawer and took out an old photo. My 60th birthday. I was in the backyard with David and Ethan. There was a cake shaped like a garden. Little sugar flowers. Ethan had his face smeared in icing. David had his arm around me. Diane was taking the photo. Everyone looked happy. I touched the edge of the picture, wondering where that joy had gone. Had it faded over time? Or had I just become forgettable? That night, after dinner, Hannah returned. She brought a small radio and played a soft tune I remembered from my youth. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. But as the song played, I found myself saying, I used to bake 3 cakes every year. 1 for each of them. Even when money was tight. Even when the oven barely worked. She nodded, eyes soft. Sounds like you loved them a lot. Still do. She squeezed my hand. Then they still feel that love, even if they don't show it the way they should. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure if that was true. The candle burned too quickly that year. I never made a wish, because I knew what I wanted, and I also knew it wasn't coming. But for that one moment, with the cupcake and the silence and the kindness of a stranger who became something more, I felt seen. And maybe that was enough. The visit that never came, they promised they would come. David said it during one of those rare 3-minute calls that had become our only form of connection. We'll come by this weekend, Mom. Ethan's got something he wants to show you. He made a project about you in school. My favorite person. You'll love it. My heart leapt when I heard it. I smiled for the first time in weeks. I held on to that sentence like a rope pulling me out of the emptiness. I spent the whole week preparing. I asked Hannah to help me pick out something nice to wear. She found a soft blue cardigan that brought out the brightness in my tired eyes. I even dabbed on a bit of lipstick. Just a little. Just in case Ethan remembered how I used to kiss him on the cheek and leave a mark he pretended to hate. Saturday came. I waited. The clock ticked past 10, then noon, then 2. Every time I heard the creak of the front door, I sat a little straighter. Every set of footsteps in the hallway made my breath catch. But they weren't for me. Miss Irene's daughter brought her a box of lavender tea. Mr. Frederick's nephew came by with a framed drawing he made. Even the staff had visitors, old friends dropping in with coffee and laughter. But for me, nothing. By 4:30 p.m., the cardigan felt too warm, the lipstick was faded, and my smile had long vanished. Hannah came in and gently asked if I'd like to go for a walk. I shook my head. Maybe they got stuck in traffic, I said, still trying to believe my own hope. Maybe, she replied, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew, I knew. They weren't coming. Not today, maybe not ever. Dinner was silent that night. The buzz of conversation didn't reach me. Even the soup, chicken noodle, my favorite, tasted like paper. When I got back to my room, the first thing I did was tear the sticky note from my calendar. David and Ethan visiting, 2 p.m. I folded it, placed it in the bottom drawer. Next to other little mementos I pretended not to keep. Ethan's drawing from kindergarten, a birthday card from 2 years ago, the last grocery list I made for David's family. I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 22. They promised. I waited. I still believe in them. I don't know why. Day 23. No call today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. I hate the sound of the hallway now. Day 24. I miss the days when being tired meant needing sleep, not needing love. Later that night, as I lay under a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, I realized something. The worst pain wasn't the absence of the visit. It was the slow erosion of belief, that feeling of knowing, deep in your chest, that you've been forgotten. But still setting the table anyway. The girl who sat at my table. It was the Tuesday after the visit that never happened. I had learned not to cry anymore. Not in front of others. Grief, I found, doesn't always come in loud sobs. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of folding a cardigan and placing it back into a drawer, knowing no one will comment on how nice it looked on you. The world inside Rosewood moved on. The same way life moves on after you're no longer part of the living memories of the people you raised. That day, I sat in the dining hall like I always did. Same table by the window, same chipped cup of weak tea, same chair with a soft cushion underneath it. Not because anyone thought of my comfort, but because I brought that cushion myself from home. Only today, something was different. There was a new face at my table. She looked no older than 16. Big brown eyes, a braid that fell over her shoulder, and a nervous smile that reminded me of a young deer wandering into a clearing for the first time. Hi, she said, setting down a tray. Is it okay if I sit with you? I blinked. Not because I didn't understand her, but because it had been so long since someone asked me anything with that much kindness in their tone. Of course, dear, I said. She introduced herself as Lily, a volunteer from a local high school. Community service hours, she said, but I could tell she genuinely wanted to be there. Her smile wasn't rehearsed. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped a napkin. We sat in silence for a while, but it wasn't the usual silence I'd grown used to. The kind that echoes with all the things people don't want to say. It was comfortable. Until Lily looked over and said, I saw the picture on your windowsill. Is that your grandson? My breath caught. Yes, I said softly. His name is Ethan. He used to call me Nana. Now he just calls Les. She didn't laugh. She didn't say the usual, kids these days. She just nodded. I don't really know my grandparents, she said. My parents moved around a lot. I think I've missed something big. That was when it hit me. All this time, I thought I was the one who was forgotten. But maybe the younger ones had been robbed too. Of stories, of warmth, of memories that someone like me was still holding on to. That afternoon, Lily came back with a notebook. If you don't mind, she said, would you tell me about your life? I want to know what it was like back then. Not the stuff in textbooks. Real stuff. I stared at her. How long had it been since anyone asked me what my life felt like? How long since I got to be more than just a patient or a burden? All right, I said, trying not to sound too eager. And so I began. I told her about growing up in a time when women stitched dreams into aprons, about raising David and Anna, about bedtime stories and the first scraped knee, about falling in love with a man who worked 3 jobs just to buy our first fridge. She listened, with her chin resting in her hands and tears sparkling in her eyes. The next day, she returned, and the day after that. Each time, we peeled back a new layer of my life. I told her about the day Ethan was born, how his tiny hand curled around my pinky, and I whispered to him, You're home now. I shared how I used to dance in the kitchen while baking, how I once won a pie contest and cried because I wished my mother had been alive to see it. I gave her pieces of myself I thought I'd buried, and she gave me something I hadn't felt in months. Worth. One evening, Lily brought in a surprise, a scrapbook. On the first page, she had pasted photos I didn't even know the staff had. me laughing with Mr. Frederick, me reading aloud to Miss Irene, and below it, a quote she wrote in her own looping handwriting. Andina mamates. Just because the world stops calling doesn't mean you stop mattering. I held the book against my chest, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from remembering what it felt like to be seen. The letter I never sent it. It started with the smell of rain on the windowsill. A soft drizzle, barely enough to wet the ground, tapped on the glass with a rhythm that reminded me of autumns long gone. Days when I would sit by the fireplace, cup of tea in hand, watching the leaves tumble like time itself had learned to fall. I hadn't written a letter in years. But that afternoon, I found myself pulling open my drawer, reaching for Lily's spare notebook. My hands trembled, not from age, but from memory. 1,000 unsent thoughts surged to the surface, and for once I didn't stop them. I wrote, Dear David, today it rained. The soft kind. The kind you used to love jumping in when you were 5. You had those yellow rain boots with little dinosaurs on them. You insisted on wearing them even when it wasn't raining. I let you. I thought it was adorable. I remember those days like they're still folded somewhere between the lines of my skin. I'm writing this not because I expect a reply, not because I think you'll read it, but because I've realized I've been holding too much for too long. You promised to visit. You didn't. I waited anyway. That's what mothers do, David. We wait. We wait when you forget your lunch, when you come home late from school, when you say, I'll call soon. We wait, not because we're foolish, but because we still believe you might remember that once we were your whole world. I don't say this to hurt you. I say it because it's true. And because no one else will tell you what it feels like to be replaced by busyness, by schedules, by comfort. I held you through every sickness. I cried for you when you got rejected from college. I sold my wedding ring for your books. And now I sit by the phone wishing it would ring. Not even for conversation, just to know I still live in some corner of your mind. I don't want apologies. I don't want flowers. I want to matter again. Even if it's just once more. Love always, Mom. I didn't seal the letter. Didn't address it. Didn't plan to send it. Instead, I placed it in the back of the scrapbook Lily had made for me. The one with the quote that had become my daily whisper. Just because the world stops calling doesn't mean you stop mattering. Later that evening, Lily came by. She noticed the fresh tear stains on my cheeks, the notebook slightly askew on the table. You wrote something? She asked. I nodded. Something that was waiting for years to be written. She didn't ask to read it. She just sat beside me, like always, and played a song from her phone. Something soft. Piano. Almost like the kind my husband used to hum when he thought I was asleep. We sat in that stillness. No need for words. Because some silences, unlike the ones that once hollowed me out, can actually heal. The next morning, I found a folded note under my pillow. Lily's handwriting. You matter to me. Ventile. I cried harder than I had in months. Not because I was sad, but because someone chose me. Without history, without obligation, just because they saw me. And that was enough to keep me breathing for one more day. The story I finally told, the wind outside was restless that evening. It rustled the branches of the big maple tree just beyond the back fence, the one barely visible from my window if I leaned far enough to the left. It was the kind of wind that made you feel like something was coming. A storm, perhaps, or a memory. Lily came by late that night. She looked tired. Not in a physical way, but in the way young people do when they've been carrying something they don't quite know how to name. Can I sit with you for a while? She asked. I nodded. Of course, she never needed to ask. She sat cross-legged on the armchair beside my bed, her hands tucked between her knees. There was a silence between us. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. I was thinking today, she finally said, about how much you've seen, how much you've kept inside. I tilted my head. She didn't usually speak like that. Everyone here has stories, she continued, but yours feel different. Like you're still editing them, even now. Like there are chapters you've skipped. I looked at her then. Really looked, and I knew. She was right. There were stories I had never told. Not to David, not to Ethan, not even to my husband. Because some stories don't just shape you, they shatter you. There was a baby, I said softly. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Before David, before Anna, I was 19, alone, terrified. I didn't know how to raise a child. My parents were ashamed. My boyfriend disappeared. I paused. The memory of that hospital room, cold, sterile, unforgiving, came rushing back. I gave her up, I whispered. They didn't let me hold her. They told me it was better that way. I never even saw her face. Lily's hand found mine. I think about her sometimes, I continued. Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I see a woman in her 40s with eyes like mine. I wonder if she's happy, if she knows someone, somewhere, never stopped loving her. Tears burned the corners of my eyes, but I didn't cry. Not yet. When I raised David and Anna, I loved them fiercely, but there was always a part of me that mothered from guilt. Like I was trying to atone for something I couldn't undo. Lily didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was a whisper. You did your best, and you still are. We sat in that moment, two generations bonded not by blood, but by vulnerability. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt lighter. The next morning, she brought a flower. Just one. A small daisy, plucked from somewhere I didn't know. She placed it beside my photo of Ethan. For your first daughter, she said, in case no one ever gave her flowers. I cried then. Fully, openly, gratefully. Because there are some wounds time cannot close. But kindness can make them stop bleeding. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of what I lost. Because in finally telling my story, I found a piece of myself I didn't know was still missing. The day they finally looked back, it was a Sunday, exactly 1 month since I arrived at Rosewood. The days had blended together like watercolors left in the rain. Some bright, some gray, most just quietly fading. But that morning, something was different. I woke up early, even before the sun spilled through the thin curtains. There was a stirring in my chest that I couldn't name. I sat by the window with my cardigan around my shoulders, the scrapbook on my lap, and Lily's daisy still fresh in a little glass jar beside me. I didn't expect them to come. I had stopped expecting anything from David or Diane weeks ago, but I still wore the cardigan, just in case. The door creaked open around 10 a.m. I thought it was Hannah. I smiled without looking up. You're early today. But it wasn't Hannah. It was David and Ethan, and behind them, Diane. My breath caught in my throat. Hi, Mom, David said softly. He looked older. Not in years, but in the way people do when they've finally seen something they should have noticed long ago. We're sorry, he added, and his voice cracked. They stepped inside slowly, like entering a sacred space. Ethan walked over and wrapped his arms around me. Tight. Tighter than I expected. I missed you, Nana, he said. I held him like I was holding time itself. All the missed calls, the broken promises, the Sundays spent staring at the door. All of it melted in that moment. They brought photos. Ethan's school project, the one David had mentioned weeks ago and never delivered. It was a collage. My favorite person, my Nana. There were photos from old albums I thought were long gone. Me pushing Ethan on a swing, me reading to him under a blanket fort, me dancing in the kitchen. And in the corner, written in blue crayon, she taught me how to be kind. David stayed long after visiting hours ended. We sat by the window. He held my hand the way he hadn't since he was a child. He told me about his stress, his fear, his guilt. I thought you were better off here, he admitted. I didn't want to see how tired you looked. It scared me. I nodded, because I understood, even if it hurt. You don't have to be perfect to be present, I said. Before they left, Diane handed me a small envelope. Inside was a key. To the guest house, she said. It's being fixed up. We want you close by again, if you're willing. I didn't cry, but my heart did. You don't have to rescue me, I said. We don't want to rescue you, she replied. We want to come back to you, if you'll let us. They left just before sunset. I stood at the window and watched the car pull away. But this time they waved. All three of them. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel left behind. I felt seen. I felt chosen. I felt home. Later that night, Lily returned. She found me still holding Ethan's project. So? She smiled. How was today? I looked up at her. Tears in my eyes, but joy in my voice. It was the day they finally looked back. She sat beside me, quiet, warm, and we watched the stars come out together. Each one a memory blinking back into view. Some people leave scars, others leave lessons. Burn and reborn stories that break you, then rebuild you.